Hey, you all, let's hop right in. I am your teacher and hostess for this particular video, Justine Gonzalez. And I want to talk a little bit about when organizations say they want to develop a more inclusive culture. Okay, so just so y'all have a little context too, because I know we have lots of listeners on our podcast who are globally based. They're not in the United States. I am currently in the United States, and this is where I was born and raised. So I want to also offer that as kind of a contextual understanding. And so we're kind of all on the same page with where I'm coming from. So the majority of my organizations that I've been able to support and work with have been based in the United States across multiple sectors, whether that's business, nonprofit, K-12 systems, et cetera. But that has kind of been our bread and butter tri-sector organizations. So the picture's been painted, it's been laid out for you all. Whether it has been corporate, academic, educational institutions, nonprofits, I have seen the same exact patterns across every sector. And one of the things is you see an uprising when people have more awareness towards specific cultural events, specifically in the United States with unrest about systemically racist systems and structures. So you often see a surge dependent upon the variables in an economy, in a socio-political context, et cetera. You often see a surge of then efforts, programming, funding, et cetera, that is devoted to that issue. The thing with that is when we look at that from a cultural psychology or neuroscience perspective, we know that the work required for us as humans to actually become aware of ourselves, to dive into perhaps the biases that we're subconsciously holding on to, that requires time, effort, and energy, among many other things. And there's some things in place. So I wanted to quickly dive into what does that mean, though? If I work in an organization, I'm like, well, how do I know if they're becoming more inclusive? Or perhaps you run an organization or you are a decision maker and you're saying, well, how do we help build a more inclusive organizational culture? Well, I've got three things for you real quick in this video today. Just actually had some really great calls, and I will often come on here and do these like mini workshops almost with some high level points, because it's often the things I'm seeing recurring in my own practitionership. Yes, I consider myself a practitioner. I am an external partner and consultant and coach to many organizations. However, I'm always very clear to say, yes, I have certain knowledge and I can help, but ultimately, this is how I approach transformational change, or organizations who want to see transformation in certain cultural indicators, such as we want to have a more inclusive organizational culture, right? If that's the goal, there's a lot of layers involved in that. And I consider myself that person who comes in more of those deeper layers, not necessarily the initial phase of, oh, let's put out a statement. That usually isn't what my organization does. Our organization is a family company, but all that to say, I wanted to give you a rundown of three things that should give you an indication if your organization is really committed to putting their money where their mouth is, for lack of a better way of saying it. Many of us have probably heard the phrase. There's two different phrases that come to mind, actually, when it comes to building more belonging at work or a more inclusive workplace, like organizational culture. There's two common sayings that come to mind. One is, people don't care how much you know until they know how much you care. And the other is, when what we expect, we have to inspect. That might sound a little harsher and like, whoa, with the accountability, Justine. But the reality is, if we put out a statement saying, I'm committed to belonging, or we're committed to this as an organization, and you saw it happen over, especially in 2020, after the murder of George Floyd, Ahmaud Arbery, Breonna Taylor, you specifically saw organizations in the United States put out statements of their commitment to anti-racism. And I know that is often done with intention behind it to rectify those things. However, sometimes we underestimate when somebody isn't feeling like they belong, or there is a marginalized group of people or a person who there's a lot that goes into that, right? Like, it's so many layers, and it isn't just we put out a statement and because we said this, it's true. The other thing that comes to mind simply is say what you mean and mean what you say. And sometimes what I have seen happen, though, is in organizational culture, because there's competing priorities, it does get buried into the wayside because it wasn't a priority before, right? There's the human instinct reaction. This is awful. We need to say something. We need to do something. But if you're still putting that into a framework that was exclusionary, specifically when we think about systemically racist structures or more patriarchal structures, all those pieces, then it's still not assessing or maybe even understanding all that could be required to actually take an organization there. And I will own that as a practitioner. There are partnerships I've gotten into where I go, oh, maybe they portrayed they were in a certain space, right? Then we're using a data tool to assess how people feel in their organization. We're engaging their employees in some honest survey tools that are anonymous. And then when we're looking at the data, it says, this is what people are saying. And that can be really jarring, but I do think that you have to start from a place of you actually want to get curious about if people are content and happy in your workplace. So let's go through three. There are three things that I want to specifically denote for you all to take note of, that when it comes to building an inclusive organizational culture, these are the things that your systems must reflect, right? So systems are the structures that are in place to support things like accountability or the different priorities that your organization says are important to them or aligned with their values, their vision, their mission, etc. So when it comes to building an inclusive organizational culture, these are the three things that I believe your systems must reflect. And again, this is from a number of years of consulting as well as coaching and developing plans alongside different levels, different sizes of organizations, et cetera, different sectors. It always comes back to, are these things already in place in the systems before we start to pinpoint a plan for transforming certain elements of your organizational culture. And that would be number one, time prioritization for people to gather intentionally. This could be something like affinity groups, workshops, healing circles, etc. Is there a willingness? Number two, is there an actual willingness to listen and believe the lived truth of others? The thing is, many organizations don't even know, like, oh, I didn't know we had a problem with this. Unless there are grievances being filed and actual lawsuits with HR departments, then no, unless you ask how people are feeling, what their thoughts are, what their opinions are authentically, then no, you don't know. And so often the first step we find ourselves in, Educator Aide, our company, we find ourselves, that is why we have data tools. That is why we have tried and true, taking them through reliability and validity testing from a statistical standpoint of, this is what we can usually predict about people's readiness levels to even engage in this more intensive work that is sometimes the subliminal, the subconscious, the self-awareness type work that we don't always have a good measure, including myself, of how long it'll take or when will people shift in their decision making, right? Like how long those things take. You can't force certain things if you want it to be an organic groundswell and not something from quote unquote the top that is just said, now we're being more inclusive. This is what we are. If you want an actual like buy-in from your team. So the third thing would be ongoing communications and outreach. One of the biggest feedbacks I always get on some of my survey tools is long rants from people about how the communication's awful. And this is for any sector, any organization, I think a lot of communications work goes back to self-awareness work and how we're communicating, when we're communicating, all the modalities. But chances are, if there weren't strong systems in place before myself or anybody else is there to support the ongoing inclusive organizational culture, those things won't just magically happen with a new initiative or with new programs like affinity groups. So those are things that I examine often. And I would encourage you, if you're watching this and you're either making a decision about an organization you want to work for, and you want to ask these questions about how do you prioritize building an inclusive organizational culture, you got to interview the people you're applying to work with too. Or you run an organization, or you work in an organization, you're like, I'm not a main decision maker usually, but I know I could influence this and I could bring these things up. Please do. That's what we're putting these videos out for. And I just want to remind you too, the three things that I named off about what your system should reflect: the time prioritization for people to gather intentionally, the willingness to listen and believe the lived truth of others. And yes, we have tools that measure that, readiness, and ongoing communications and outreach. Those are just ideas for base level. Do you already have systems that reflect these as important? That in particular, that list of three, it's not a list of quick tips for building inclusive workplace culture. This type of work requires a lot of intentional design and committed energy and resources. And it also requires systems, mechanisms, and strategies for three types of accountability: self, shared, and collective, all different. So my final example to kind of bring this full circle for you all, please drop in the comments your questions for us, for our team members. But let me bring it back to food. I love food and I love how much it connects us across cultures. But to be realistic about the inputs that you are committing to as an organization. And here's an example: a frozen turkey. That's very different than a hot pocket I put in for 1 minute. Why? If I purchase a frozen turkey at the store, I have to thaw, prep, marinate, smoke or bake, carve or grill, serve, eat, clean up, decide what I want to do with leftovers. Maybe I reinvent those, right? But that's not the same as microwaving a turkey hot pocket for 1 minute. That's one of the most basic examples I typically give, because we often are equating a microwave solution with inputs that, quite frankly, are like a slow roasted process. When you're dealing with humanity, you're dealing with people, and what does it mean to them to feel like they work at an inclusive organizational culture? Like where they work actually is that. What does that mean for them? And there's a lot that, if you want to get results with these type of shifts, or you're serious about it within your organization, it requires intentional strategy design. That's something we do. It requires that ongoing energetic commitment across all segments of your organization, and then also the systems of accountability. So if you already don't have some of those mechanisms for ongoing communications and outreach, it will be hard to then say, we're moving towards a more inclusive organizational culture. Let's first get some of those things in place that will actually give you longevity, so it's not just a performative action. So that's what I had. I just wanted to put that out there because it's been something that's been coming up a lot as I reevaluate with partners, as I check in on the progress of some of our client portfolio. And it's something that I'm seeing that if we aren't realistic about pacing ourselves when we say, I want a more inclusive organizational culture, then we are setting ourselves up for some disappointment, because we're thinking, well, we can do a training and we're good. And there's actually a lot more of a comprehensive approach and holistic and inclusive approach to even rolling out some different things you want to put in place to work towards a more inclusive organizational or workplace culture. So hope you subscribe, tune in, put in the comments what you want more of. If you had questions about this specific video, or your own thoughts or ideas or your own experiences, we'd love to hear about them. Really excited to grow this, and we will see you next time.